Goodbyes, letting go, change, and finding closure are all necessary transitions in the story of life. It is for certain that nothing that exists will remain as it is now. It is the one truth that is the source of a great deal of pain in our human experience. It is said that our attachments and the longing for a perpetual existence lead to sorrow and brokenness. But the truth is, nothing is constant but change alone. And as inevitable as change is, we often find ourselves to be resistant to it. In Buddhism, it is the concept of impermanence that one is encouraged to embrace, with the art and the practice of letting go of attachments and outcomes. The art brings us closer to enlightenment. And every goodbye is a form of letting go, albeit for a moment, a week, a year, or a lifetime. We all must let go of what was and what will never be again. Eventually, we will all have to say goodbye to our own life here on earth and to what we've come to identify as ourselves. Indeed, even in life, we must say our goodbyes and farewells to relationships and to the times we shared with others. And we will change careers, and we will move to new homes. Our children will leave the nest. Our mothers and fathers will grow old and pass away. For every beginning, there is an end. But every ending is also a start of something new. Old things must indeed pass away so that new chapters and new paths can begin. Such is life. But too often, goodbyes are bitter, if not tasteless. They usually fall in what I describe as categories of good, bad, and the downright ugly. I'm sure that we've all heard of a few doozies. It's become more frequent that people are learning of the end of a relationship via text message. It's over, send. Text message. What about the young girl who quit her job using a video that she posts online? But before making her grand exit, she disparages the company and her boss. She twerks in the hallways and dances on the top of her desk. The headline read, "This may be the coolest way ever to quit your job." As a former employer myself, I would say, I think not. She crossed several quitting and hiring taboos. And her letting go process will forever be a spectacle for all to see. I say good luck finding that next job. Because girlfriend, they Google you now. Okay, then there's the Rhett, if you go, where shall I go? What shall I do? And then Rhett says to Scarlett, frankly, my dear, I don't. Some of you sound like you've been waiting to say that for a long time. My sister had an interesting way of processing the closure of a failed marriage. She struggled deeply while attempting to navigate relationships after the loss of her marriage, the loss of the ministry which she had helped to build, and then the loss of close friends who chose sides and remained close to her unfaithful ex. Her voicemail message during the time summed it all up. "Hello, this is Allison. I'm unable to take your call at this time, but leave a message at the beep and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Oh, but you should know that recently I've been going through some changes. So if you don't get a call back from me, just know that you were one of those changes." You would have to know how really sweet my sister is to realize how broken her heart must have been to leave such a message. I did get her permission to use it, and she said, if you need to use that, go ahead on. She said, use it. Since letting go Goodbyes and change are inevitable. It is incumbent upon us not only to learn how to let go, but learn how to do it well. Whether it is death, divorce, job change, or an empty nest, we ought to learn to bid our farewells and to say our goodbyes with dignity and grace. Because a letting go process can bring the needed affirmation and completion to all parties concerned. And a bad or ugly one can leave unnecessary pain that could last a lifetime for all those involved. Often when our transitions aren't done well, people are left with questions. When someone leaves without completing or finalizing the relationship, there's a huge gap. More often than not, those who leave without a proper completion may not feel the pain of parting, but it is usually the ones left behind who suffer. They are left with words unsaid, love unexpressed, and a mind far from being at rest. Their story is like reading a good book only to discover that the last and final pages are missing. So I feel that it is important that I talk a little about resentment and the inability to transition or to let go. There are people who have gone unchanged in their hearts because of something that may have taken place many years ago. And I know that there are some things that are so painful that one may never physically or mentally recover. I get that. So please take what I'm about to say in context of what is possible in your own life and applying your own understanding. But here it is. Holding on too tightly to the past will not allow you fully to embrace the future change that must take place in our existence. And I'll say it again. Holding on too tightly to the past will not allow you fully to embrace future change, the future change that must take place in our existence. There are people still holding on to something that took place 65 years ago, and I have counseled with them. I know they exist. You were 5 when it happened. Wow, look at that. So it is not necessarily true that time heals all wounds. A few months ago, I was speaking to a long-term friend of mine who finally divulged to me that for the last 25 years, he had held a deep resentment against me for something I had said or done. By not telling me, he never gave me the opportunity to make right the perceived wrong. But he had this one memory that he chose to freeze in time. I told him that I was truly sorry, that I didn't recall the incident. But more importantly, I said, I am no longer the person I was 25 years ago. It's hard for me to imagine that any person is the same at 50 as they were at 25. I had changed. And if I were the person that I am now back then, I'm sure I would have made different choices. Now, I've had the honor to be able to officiate many funerals and memorials. And I've seen the very best and some of the sweetest goodbyes, those filled with laughter and tears of joy. But recently I officiated a memorial for a man who hadn't spoken to his son for nearly 30 years. He had a story, and the narrative did not change over time, even though both individuals had. The result was that there was no new memories and no relationship with the grandchildren and the children with their grandfather. The son sat there, right there to be exact, with a heavy, unresolved look on his face. I will always remember that look. This was a regretful and bitter goodbye. In this case, it was the father who died, still angry with his son over some past event, some past hurt, holding on to that one mistake that wouldn't allow him to ever see the personal growth of his own son. His son was no longer the person that had hurt him. He had changed, as time requires us all to do. This felt a bit personal to me, you see, because I also had a troubled relationship with my own father. I blamed him for all the pain and suffering that our family underwent as a direct result of his choices. What he did to his family a long time ago continued to have its effect because I could not let go. Most of us are guilty of this in one way or another. I realize that holding on to what my father did 30 years ago does not affect him at all, but it is affecting how I am showing up in the world. And he died without ever saying the words that I so desperately needed him to say. I'm sorry. I needed that completion, and I felt that he owed me as much. But I discovered that it wasn't him, but me who held the power to bring completion to my own life, to my own story. And my breakthrough came when I attended an ontological seminar called Landmark Education Forum in Minneapolis a few years ago. There, the moderator encouraged the group to seek closures and completions by letting go of any unresolved issues. I would have to learn how to forgive my father. And I had heard all of my life that I should forgive him. And I had tried. But I didn't really know how to forgive. How does it work? C.S. Lewis made this telling remark: everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. So I sat there counting all the reasons why I could not release my father. Besides all that, by that time he had already died. And when I finished that thought, the moderator said, if your father is no longer alive, write him a letter. Well, I had heard this as well. And every time I wanted to do that, I would just begin to tail my father off. So I saw no restorative purpose in doing this. But the moderator began to give the guidelines on how I could get this done. And I will tell you what he said was simple but transformative. He said, let your letter be about your own inauthenticity in carrying the past for all these years. The change happened almost instantaneously as the facilitator began to say that your father can't be something he isn't. He went on and on, making sure that everyone in attendance comprehended what he was trying to get across. Your father was the person he was because he was the person he was. He can never be someone he is not. I was angry with my father because he was not like Mr. Johnson across the street. He brought his kids candy and toys and took them on vacation every summer. So all the people, good fathers, model citizens with whom I could compare him or whom I'd imagine him being, he could never be. All the choices I thought he should have or could have made, he could have only made the choices that he made. End of story. This is called living in the present. As long as you feel, think, or believe that he could have done something differently than what he actually did, it would only keep you living in the past. And real change is not possible for you. Holding him to what you imagine him to be is not the reality of who he actually is. He could only do what he did. He could only choose what he chose. In the context of his life circumstances that started even before he was born. This is not to remove any responsibility for his actions. He had paid dearly for his poor choices. And this is not to say that we should not strive to be the best people we can be. But what occurred in the past is forever sealed in time. And all we can do now is let go and instead look into the future. That was the reality that I had to accept. For that is the only reality that there will ever be. I asked myself, can it be this simple? I began to free my father and thus free myself. At that point, I no longer assigned blame to my father. I know this sounds a bit simplistic, but it changed my life forever. The letter I wrote to my father enabled me to let go. It sounded as if an 11-year-old child wrote it. Because in truth, that was a person who was wounded so many years ago. That's how long I carried my anger. That's how long I lived incomplete. I wrote, Dear Dad, please forgive me for trying to make you into someone you are not. And forgive me for my anger toward you, for you're not being that someone whom I thought you should be. I no longer expect you to be the person you are not, because it is impossible for you to be anyone else. Dad, I am so thankful that you and you alone are my Father. I have been blessed to have a father like you simply because now I have a life that works. I've had great successes. I have experienced great joy and yes, some trouble and tears along the way, but that's life. Dad, I've lived a life of which you would be proud. I love my daughter and my partner. In fact, I love all of my family. And I know that I've never told you this before, but I love you. So goodbye, Daddy. May you rest in peace, knowing that you are loved and accepted just the way you are. Your son, Randy. I chose to show grace to my father, and for the first time in my life, I was able to let go because I realized that I could never change the past. I could only change my perceptions of it. And I began to appreciate the road that led me here and the pivotal part that my father led to my own story. This is a lot easier when you realize that our stories can never be the whole truth. Then the past can no longer hold us captive. We must allow the narratives to shift and be changed in ways that serve us. It's a shift or a state of change from being a character in a story to being the space in which the stories occur, to being the author, as it were. So I say, let it go. No, this may be difficult for some, but completing things frees us up. It doesn't automatically imply that everything is going to be wonderful in the future, but it does mean that we can address whatever there is to address in our present day relationships instead of dramatizing what might have been incomplete from the past. Even if the person who wounded us so deeply and left us unresolved and incomplete is still alive, we must sometimes choose to simply accept the apology that was never given. If you need further closure, write them a letter and complete that chapter of your life, allowing the rest of your story to evolve as you choose. You need to live in such a way that the people who will mourn us after we are gone find more gratitude in the fact that we have lived than grief at the advent of our death. Trey Parker said, saying goodbye doesn't mean anything. It is the time we spent together that matters, not how we left it. Let us make our life count so that people will want to remember us and not forget. Samuel Butler said, to die completely, a person must not only forget, but be forgotten. And he who is not forgotten is not dead. So each of us has a very important role of ensuring that friends and loved ones are left with memories that bring them joy, memories that make it easier to live and love and enjoy the life that has been touched by our presence. If there is one thing that I've taken away from all the weddings and memorials that I have had the honor to officiate, and I believe that it should be one of the primary purposes of life, but it is this: we complete our lives by causing good and lasting memories in the minds and hearts of those we love and leave. And I'll say it again. We complete our lives by causing good and lasting memories in the minds and hearts of those we love and leave. And since there will always be callous people, hurtful words, and disappointing moments, I feel the need to even go further and say that we should try to create good and affirming memories, even in the hearts and minds of those who do not love us back. I think this is what Jesus meant when he said to do good to those who mistreat us. When he said to treat others as we would have them treat us. Or don't repay evil with evil, but repay evil with good. I don't believe that there's anything more important than leaving such a legacy of good memories. When this happens, the conditions and circumstances of our relationships begin to reorder and realign themselves. How we see and hear others and how they see and hear us is transformed. And the goodbyes, the letting go, the change and transformation, although often sad, will carry with them gratitude, thoughtfulness, and appreciation. So goodbyes ought to be bittersweet. We live in the realm where everything eventually comes to an end. And yet everything is eternal. Because we cannot reverse the flow of time. Whatever takes place is forever imprinted in the time in which it occurs. Every action and choice has not only the potential to change the future, it does in fact change the future. Every act of kindness, of cruelty, can inexplicably affect someone's life and therefore the entire course of human history forever. Author and spiritual activist Marianne Williamson reminds us that we are powerful beyond measure. And while we are alive, we should not shy away from this awesome responsibility and honor of simply being. We are to take in all the life that we can with courage, with everything it brings, and to live out our values. We are to nudge the course of the future in the direction of our vision. We are to live as fully as we can, even though it means that at any given point we may have to let go. However painful, we have to embrace goodbyes. And while we may mourn the ending of what was, we are to celebrate the fact that we were present. And that we had a chance not only to witness the events as they were unfolding, to share the love with others, to stand up for what was right, but we also were able to participate in the outcomes. So goodbyes should be bittersweet because they are closures of the chapters that comprise the books of our lives, because they testify that we indeed lived. So I implore you to seek the good in letting go. Speaking of great memories, I must tell you a story about someone who did a goodbye really well. It is a remarkable life and transition of our beloved mother and church member, Millie Arthrell. Millie died in 2010 at 97 years of age. And I remember how sharp she was. Millie was fully aware that the final chapter of her life was coming to an end. She faced her death with such courage, dignity, and grace like I have never seen anyone do. I visited with her a couple of months before her death, and she most talked about her life and the many books that she had read. Knowing that she was in decline, she told me how she just longed to complete just one more book. She wanted to read one more great tale before she left this earth. Even at this stage, it was about learning and knowing and discovering more. According to Marlon Lavenhar, in his eulogy that he delivered for Millie, she somehow knew the very day that she would make her transition. She wanted desperately to be able to say goodbye to her namesake granddaughter whose arrival was delayed. And after learning of the delay, she remarked, "Oh, I won't be here." But while there was still time, she requested that all the healthcare workers at Clare House, those who had cared for her, to come to her room. It was a shift change, so all of them were there from both the morning and evening shifts. They gathered around her bed, and Millie perked up and was suddenly alert and coherent. She talked about the wonderful life she had prior and since moving to Tulsa. She talked about her groups and clubs like the Shakespeare group and her teaching, her church, and her many, many friends. And then she thanked each one of those who had cared and carried her in those final days. She said, "I have found so many wonderful people and rich friendships. I never knew I could come here to Clare House and also experience such love. You all have made such a difference. Thank you." They tell me that there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Each of the caregivers took turns squeezing her hand and saying their goodbyes. And within less than 20 minutes of her speech, Millie transitioned. I hope all of our transitions are as graceful. Millie died as she had lived, in completion. She transitioned this life with the same grace and dignity that she displayed while she was with us. She faced death with courage and resolve. She completed her course. She finished her race. She perfected the goodbye. And I'm so glad that I have the memory of Millie Arthrell. As I leave this place, she gives me hope. Her legacy will forever be a part of my story. So this is my last sermon as a staff member of this great church and community. As I leave, I'm reminded of a passage in John's gospel where Jesus is going away and he assures those in his care of his return. He states, "In my Father's house there are many mansions, and I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you will be also." And like Jesus, I too am going away. But I plan on returning just like Jesus. But since I'm not like Jesus, I will not be preparing a place for you. But if you happen to find yourself in the Wilmington, Delaware area, look me up. I will certainly point you to some great hotels. But truly, the message I take from this passage is that Jesus assures his followers that they will always be together. I take this to mean that wherever I am, you will be with me. Because I am taking a part of you with me, and I am leaving a part of me here to perhaps encourage you every time you think of my words, my ministry, and our interactions. I go encouraged by the grace that each of you have shown me during these last 5+ years. How graceful and forgiving you were when I made mistakes. I'll always remember how you accepted me just as I am. We have cried, laughed, cursed, and fought, but we have done this together. We have done the difficult work on race, women's rights, criminal justice, immigration, and we have not always been in agreement, but we have stayed together. So as I leave you physically and travel many miles away, I will carry with me the same fight for justice and equality. I will continue to stand against prejudice and bigotry. I will continue to live out the covenant of this community, which has sustained me while I have been here with you. And if I have wounded anyone, please forgive me. Charge it to my head and not my heart. I hope your memories of me and my work here inspire feelings of admiration and love. And remember, as long as we are awakened to our memories, our good memories, it lasts for as long as we are alive. Thank you so much. Amen.